So I'm not a huge fan of hospitals, especially not emergency rooms. Yet there I was, sitting in the ER on the fourth date with Ted, my future husband. We were waiting to see the doctor, and I was the one wearing the awkward gown that ties in the back. We had only met 3 weeks prior, and I didn't know when I met him at a mutual friend's party that I was heading into a perfect storm that would soon become my own private Bermuda Triangle. I was 26, living on my own with a couple of roommates and holding down my first chaotic corporate job. The company was a temp service agency, and I was hired full time to manage one of their accounts. We were placing dozens of workers weekly at a little startup company named Qualcomm. Keeping up with the daily new hire paperwork and giving welcome orientations to each and every phone parts technician was nearly impossible. I was feeling anxious by the end of the first week, and those feelings never went away. Outside of work, the excitement of dating Ted was giving me butterflies and goosebumps, and it felt like my life was on the cusp of something new. The plan for the fourth date was for Ted to book a hotel, drive down from Los Angeles, and spend the weekend with me. All week, my nerves were a wreck. At work, I found it hard to concentrate. I couldn't stomach much food, and my brain was racing with best and worst case scenarios of how my life was about to unfold. So much so that at night, I was tossing and turning and only sleeping 2 or 3 hours at a time. By Saturday, I was scatterbrained. And once Ted arrived in San Diego, it wasn't long after we shared a hug and a hello that he sensed there had been a shift. He mentioned that I seemed tired. He asked, "Are you feeling okay?" I said, I'm okay. I just had a long, hard, busy week, but I'm really excited to see you." He said, "All right, but just let me know if you're not up for it. I'll cancel our dinner reservation. We can always just order in." Within a couple of hours of attempting to relax at the hotel, I couldn't hide my symptoms anymore. My mind was exhausted and racing, both at the same time. I opened up and shared that it had been more than a hard week. It had been an extremely rough one, and I wasn't sure why I could no longer sleep, eat, or focus. He said, "Okay, maybe we need to get you some help. Is there anyone you want me to call?" A few years prior, I had been in psychotherapy to deal with sexual abuse issues from my childhood, so I thought of calling Melody, my former therapist, and had high hopes she could talk me off this anxiety ledge I was now perched upon, and then I'd book an appointment and I'd start seeing her again ASAP. So we dialed 411 and found her in the directory. Ted dialed the number and left a brief message on her voicemail. She called back within 30 minutes. We were on the phone for only a moment or two when she gently, yet firmly, suggested I hang up and call 911. On the inside, I thought, oh shit, this is bad. I knew something was up, but call 911? Really? On the outside, I took a deep breath, looked at Ted, and said, "The hospital's not far from here. Will you drive me to the ER? I don't want to go in an ambulance." He nodded yes, and off we went. And that's where Ted met his future in-laws for the first time. Walking into that ER, I was ready to surrender to whatever was happening to me. The fatigue, the exhaustion, the racing thoughts, and this losing track of my short-term memory was scaring me. I needed some kind of break from the chaos in my head, and I definitely got one. Let's call it a psych break. It's kind of like spring break, but not. Officially, I believe it's called a psychotic break. And when the doctor in the emergency room says you're having one, it's super freaky. The results of date night in the ER were life-changing. I ended up leaving with a new future husband and a bipolar diagnosis. My family and I discussed possible treatment options with the medical team. And after weighing out the choices, my parents and I signed waivers and left the building against medical advice. My folks did not want to see me admitted to Mesa Vista, the local mental health hospital, where decades earlier we all had gone to visit my grandmother, Dorothy, who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder just after my mom was born. So instead of being institutionalized, I would get to recover privately in the safety of my childhood home, where no one would have to show proper ID and sign in or out to see me. The drugs I was prescribed for this sweet little staycation had me in a zoned out haze of glory with a slight touch of paranoia. I have no idea what I was on. I just remember them being described as antipsychotic drugs that will help. I recall there being a tight schedule of when the meds were administered, because the morning meds were meant to wake me up, the daytime meds to keep me floating, and the evening meds were meant to knock me out for deep sleep. But apparently, not dead to the world kind of sleep, because one night I went sleepwalking. From my room out to the garage, carefully maneuvering past some unorganized obstacles in order to grab an ice pick that was part of an old bar tool kit near my dad's workbench. How I spotted this pick in my waking hours is beyond me, and the fact that I snatched it in my sleep is quite the feat. I then retraced those same steps back to bed with said ice pick in hand. When having to explain myself in the morning, I said, I need it for protection from my bad dreams. Oh, my poor parents. They must have been pretty disturbed to discover my worn-out teddy bear had been replaced with a rusty old ice pick in the dark of night. I suppose this daily medication cocktail was created for me to be functional, but not a danger to myself or anyone else. I just know I was really out of it for 3 weeks until my 27th birthday. My first wish was for independence, but in order to regain my freedom, I had to deal with this diagnosis and try bipolar on for size. I did my best to make it fit and chose the path of least resistance. I didn't want to further upset my folks. I saw in their eyes how very worried they were and felt the fear as we negotiated my next steps. My focus was to be okay for their sake and for mine, in that order. A couple of months after my diagnosis, I moved to LA. I had to find a new doctor. Luckily, I liked the first psychiatrist I met with. Let's call him Dr. God of Sky. Though he pronounced it Dr. Godofsky. Not as cosmic and magical as my way of saying it, but he was a good doc who felt heaven sent. I stayed under his care for about 13 years. I was a good patient and took the prescribed drugs as directed. At first, we met weekly, then monthly, and after a few years of smooth sailing, I went to him quarterly, timing each appointment for after the blood work results were in. Eventually, as long as my blood serum reports were within normal range, then I was good to go for another 3 months. Year over year, I spent a lot of time in a therapy chair, talking it all out. I wanted to avoid reaching that 911 tipping point ever again, and taking the meds helped with that. I wasn't feeling the ends of the spectrum anymore. No big joys, no deep sorrows either. Just sedated smiles when times were good, and mild sadness when appropriate. But that wasn't enough for me. In therapy, I had many occasions to drill down into my family's medical history. It could be determined, perhaps, that my diagnosis is a hybrid of sorts. One side of my family had a strong history of mental health issues, while the other side of my family included a sexual predator that preyed on me repeatedly until I hit puberty. So was this psychotic break a part of my DNA, or was it a result of disassociation due to the trauma I endured? Was I dealing with bipolar or PTSD issues? So many questions left unanswered. All my trouble started with the years of sexual trauma when I was a kid. The repeated invasion of my body left my brain battered and my soul conflicted. I lived through my trauma years in fear, keeping my invisible scars a big secret. I certainly could not erase what had happened to me, though I would try hard to forget. I also dreamed of setting myself free from the internal angst I was coping with, and yet had no idea how to heal my wounds way back then. Coming of age and becoming a teenager with a dark taboo secret was scary. My screams of panic never made it out. But somehow, I did. I made it out of high school and managed to graduate from SDSU. That's also the same time period when I outed my predator to my family. He was my father's father, and he had remarried. And I was determined to make sure the abuse stopped with me. So, as I was dealing with the fallout and shrapnel that is incest, with the help of my former therapist and my mom, I confronted my monster and his new wife. He sat there, denied everything, and called me a liar. That was it. I stood up, looked him in the eye, and said, "No. You are the fucking liar." As I flew out the door, he hurried to his porch, yelling into the streets, "You don't know what you're talking about. You're just as crazy and bipolar as your grandma Dorothy." Upon reaching the milestone of 12 years without a mental health crisis, Dr. G and I began to discuss the idea that maybe a complex PTSD diagnosis might actually fit me better than leaving me in the bipolar box for the rest of my days on Earth. So we started a new protocol and switched up my meds. Gradually, we got to the lowest dose possible with the ultimate goal of being off all meds. Slow and steady, we achieved this goal and scheduled our final appointment, knowing that I could come back anytime as needed. Before we parted ways, the good doc made sure I had a solid support system of good humans that would help me and maybe more importantly, call me out if I was starting to have symptoms of mania or depression. By now, I was 39, and I could easily confirm that yes, I have good humans in my life. He then sent me off into the wild blue yonder with a sample packet of in case of emergency drugs. He said, "Here, put these somewhere safe. If you ever hit crisis mode, take 2 and call 911. And in the next breath, he said, "You know, I don't blame you, kid. You deserve a chance to see if you can live a life without a daily dose of medication and the care of a psychiatrist. I sincerely hope I never see you again as my patient. And I wish you well." It's taken me 22 years of searching, but I finally have my answer. And now I get to be fully in charge of managing my mental health in ways that fit me best. And I'm happy to report that those in case of emergency pills weren't needed. And if they ever are, I know where to go and who to call.
First time vampire, Michelle O'Neill, everybody.